Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And we are back with more of our Fantasia Fest coverage. We are kind of coming down to the wire here. Only a handful of reviews left. And this one, I gotta say, was one that we were kind of anticipating. I know we reported on this many moons ago, back when we were still doing the Sunday Scaries. And I remember, Luke, you got pretty excited about this just because, again, it's from the great Chuck Russell, responsible for The Blob 1988, which we are massive fans of. And yeah, I mean, this was definitely something to look forward to when you have somebody from the old guard kind of stepping back into the ring.
Absolutely. When you hear Chuck Russell's name out there, and of course we both love the Blob, you're always eager to see how those guys from the 80s are going to translate into more so the modern era, I guess. Especially looking at Chuck Russell's filmography, he's had a bit of a gap, especially when it comes to horror, some smaller time action things. So I was rather intrigued to see what kind of flavor he was going to bring, especially looking at the Blob from 1988. We've talked about it numerous times on the channel, saying how great that world building is. Even Dream Warriors, that's one of the favorite in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So stepping back into horror, I was really excited to see what he was going to do, and of course taking on a property from 1986 and kind of bringing that back into the modern era here, where the Ouija board, witchboard subgenre, if you want to call it that, is really hit or miss, because sometimes it works, but a lot of times it really just falls into those really familiar traps.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, were you familiar with the 1986 film? Is that something that you were kind of maybe you'd watched it growing up? Because it was a complete blind spot for me. I'm not familiar with the Witchboard films at all.
For me, I did not watch it growing up. I did uncover this one a few years ago, just as I was diving down the rabbit hole of missed horror. And I watched this one. It's a fine film. It's nothing that I go back and have repeat watches of. I know there's sequels out there as well. Never checked. But this one I think flies under the radar for a lot of horror fans, especially when we're just more so into that general horror, because this one, I don't know if it necessarily got a lot of love when it initially came out.
Yeah, this was man, this film, it's I gotta say this did not work for me. I think if I'm just gonna come right out and say it, like I went into it obviously, like we said, with the best intentions here, with it being Chuck Russell, with it being kind of a reinvigoration of an 80s property that I wasn't familiar with. So I had pretty much all of the positives there of not being a dedicated fan, not saying, oh, they're gonna ruin my childhood, not being a toxic fan. And man, I don't know what the direction of this movie was, because good lord, this is not the same person who made the Blob, in my opinion. Because like the characters, the concept, like I guess the concept is fine, it from like a basic standpoint, but really this film just lost me probably after about 10 minutes, once we really got into our main characters and kind of how they interact with each other and just how unnatural everybody felt. Man, this was a chore to get through, unfortunately.
Certainly, this one was a huge letdown as we got deeper and deeper into this film. It felt like our boat was taking on water, so to speak. Getting into this one, they opened up with kind of like period jump, and I was like, okay, what are we gonna do here? How's this gonna unravel? And I got to say, by the time we go full circle with this thing, it's so eye rolly to me that I was just completely checked out. And like you said, characters are not relatable. They don't feel authentic in any sense. This really, in my notes when I was writing, I was like, at one point, I think I had written Blumhouse horror, just because it felt like it was such a general kind of what we get from a lot of basic general audience horror now. And even then, it teeters into territory that's even worse than that at times. There's a big dinner scene here that happens, and we get pelted with a lot of bad CGI, just a lot of bad reactions from a lot of our characters as well. And by that time, I think that happens closer toward the end of the film. And honestly, that's at the absolute nail in the coffin here, because there's not many positives to take away from this film, but I was still trying to remain optimistic. I was like, hey, maybe we have this comeback in the third act here. But unfortunately, it just gets worse and worse.
It does. And that's the thing that just like I gotta say, it doesn't start off terrible. I mean, like, it was one of those things where it definitely didn't feel like on the tones or the level that I was kind of hoping for with it. It did feel very like Disney Channel special like movie towards the beginning there. I mean, obviously with it being a bit more violent. But it was, once I noticed that violence was all CGI blood, and once I started to realize, oh, good God, this is what we're going for here. This is the kind of movie that we're stepping into. Yeah, it was just a slow crawl from basically the deathbed to the grave, in my opinion. I was just finding it so hard to keep my interest in this movie, and you know, normally I don't have that many like that hard of a time to watch something, even if I can find it to be kind of goofy fun. And you know, I think that at points I do find it pretty goofy and it does get kind of funny. There's one sequence involving a cat that I thought was pretty hilarious. I'll say a cat and you know, maybe an appendage, and I thought that was pretty hilarious. But that's not what the filmmakers are going for. And you know, whenever you land on that side of things, it's, you know, you can't help but, you know, feel bad after watching it. You know, you're just kind of like, damn, like, I don't know really where the direction was with this one. I don't know what they were trying to bring to the table in a sense with this film, because it doesn't do anything all that groundbreaking. It doesn't do anything all that exciting with the concept. It's just kind of a blah movie.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it was a bit of a letdown because speaking with Chuck Russell, he mentioned, you know, his love for practical effects and how he tries to use those regularly, and how even in Witchboard, you know, he wanted to just use touch up with CGI, but a lot of this just feels like blatant CGI, you know? So, you know, there was this disconnect from learning that and then watching this because, again, during that dinner scene, we get pelted with so much bad CGI that if you weren't out of this film, that's instantly going to jerk you right out of any sort of positives that you had of this film. And yes, you're talking about that scene with a cat and a particular appendage there, you know, where you look at this film, you want to have fun with it in terms of the cheesiness, but it never leans enough into the cheesiness to say, okay, all bets are off, I'm just in this to have fun. It starts taking itself a little too serious at moments. So it's like the identity crisis of how am I supposed to be feeling as I'm watching this film? Because it teeters with really bad cheesiness, but then it pulls itself back and trying to maintain some sort of serious tone, and we never feel invested. And then again, that goes back to our characters in those relationships. Nothing ever feels authentic. There's a character in here that is almost a cross between a bad Matthew McConaughey impersonation as well as Channing Tatum's Gambit, you know, and it just doesn't work. It really just takes you out of it, especially when you're in those scenes. Supposed to be living into serious moments. It's just like, what is going on here?
Yeah, and I completely second what you just described there. And you know, as far as the actors go, I have seen people like I think it's, you pronounce it, Charlie Heaton in other things. He wasn't too bad. There's other actors in here that I recognize from just little bit parts, and they're not terrible in those other films, but I really think it comes down to the writing here, because again, they just don't have chemistry together. Everybody feels like a flat, like, piece of paper. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like they're just, it feels like they just got the script today and they haven't been able to workshop it. There's no real chemistry between anybody, and I just don't understand how this was. You know, we sat back and edited this movie together and we thought, this is the one, this is how we're going to do this. There wasn't any thought to be like, we need to kind of go back on this and kind of rework it. Maybe that just wasn't a luxury that they had, but I mean, yeah, this was just a pretty big disappointment again for something that I didn't have the biggest expectations on. So this could have been an easy win, but again, it just falls onto the pile of another film that I just don't understand what the intention was, why we thought this was the route we needed to go with this. And it's overall just a very boring and forgettable movie.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the cast, I think Jamie Campbell Bower is probably going to pop out of you know, those names, as you know, he's a big bad Vecna in Stranger Things, and you know, the flavor, the idea of that character, and the charisma that he has. is phenomenal in that. I buy him as that big bad, and in this he does have a naughty side to him. But it's one of those things where I think the introduction to him was rather decent. I was like, okay, let's level up here and see what we're gonna get. But again, it falls flat with everything else in this film, where we just don't get enough. We don't get any progression with these characters. It just feels like we're going through the motions, unfortunately. And again, I didn't have a love for Witchboard, in terms of that kind of Ouija board subgenre. And again, that's hit or miss. But when you look at like something like Ouija Origin of Evil, I think that's rather interesting in terms of building that tension. But when you have something like that, we have scenes in here with the witch board that plays very similar to a Ouija board, but the tension's not there. It just feels rather cheesy. There's a couple scenes and choices that they do make in here that are eye-rolling when you're supposed to be feeling tense and feeling scared. It just doesn't work. So, having Chuck Russell attached to this, being familiar with Witchboard, I was like, I'm ready to really enjoy this thing. If you give me something extra cheesy, hey, I could be on board with that. If you give me something serious with the world building you have of the Blob or even Dream Warriors or those characters, hey, we could have something rather fun on our hands here. But unfortunately for me, this one falls into a slash it. I will not be revisiting this one. It just doesn't work. It's overly long as well. This is almost pushing 2 hours.
Yeah.
And what they give you is not justifiable at all.
That would have been my last complaint there. Yeah, way too long. And yeah, this is easily a slash it for me as well. Again, after about 10 minutes of the movie, I just kind of knew I was heading in that direction. And it had every opportunity to like change course, and it just doesn't. Yeah, so I don't know when this thing's going to drop, where it's going to drop as far as, its wide release. So, I'm very curious to see what people think when this does finally come out. I could see this one popping up on streaming. I doubt this is going to get a theatrical release. And, that's unfortunate for, again, the people involved. There's a couple of great players in here who just, again, the script didn't do any justice for them. And, of course, this is not really where we want to be with the great Chuck Russell. But we'll see what happens. Maybe in a couple of months when this thing does finally come out, people will say, hey, you guys were too harsh on this one. You were completely wrong, whatever. We'll just have to wait and see. But something you don't have to wait and see for is Luke had the one big positive to come out of this entire Witchboard experience, and that was that he got to sit down with the great Chuck Russell. Luke, we're about to flop over to your footage there, so why don't you give the folks a little bit of an intro there?
Chuck Russell cannot be a nicer guy. What a phenomenal interview. I would be lying if I said that I was not nervous jumping into that interview. But honestly, as we started conversing, I threw the playbook out the window, and it was just such a natural flow of our conversation. He has so many great tidbits about the Blob, about Dream Warriors, which is where we spent a lot of our time, actually. And we did talk some Witchboard as well. So, what a great conversation. I do honestly look forward to speaking with him again because he's so knowledgeable. I just wish this was a little bit better.
Yeah, I really was upset that I couldn't make that interview. As we were setting it up, I just knew it was like, if we're going to make this work, if there's anybody that deserves to be in that interviewee chair, it was you, sir, because you were the one that introduced me to the Blob. And I thank you for that every day because it is one of my favorite horror films. So, yeah, absolutely wonderful. It's a wonderful interview. So I'm going to jump over to that for you guys. Definitely, though, if you are interested in checking out Witchboard, keep your eye out for it. Like I said, we don't have a solid release date just yet. But until then, we have a lot of other reviews up on the channel. We got to check out the great Mickey's Mousetrap, which is just a complete 180 from this. So definitely check that one out. That's a
quality film,
quality flick. But in all reality, we did get to see Cuckoo, which was pretty damn good. So definitely check that out, as well as my 5 films you should watch before seeing Cuckoo, which is also live on the channel. So other than that, guys, that's going to wrap us up here. So until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, enjoy this interview.
Was that, Blob remake of, an older property when you dive into Dream Warriors, an installment in already an established franchise? But you've done, standalone projects as well. Do you kind of approach those, whether it's installment in a franchise or a remake, especially when we're looking at Witchboard, which was original was in 1986 and kind of had a little bit of an established following? When you're approaching a project like this, with kind of an established fan base already, are you a little hesitant because maybe there is a beloved for the original and people are going to
Of
critique
course.
it to the full
Remember, those originals still exist. I try to honor the original and take what inspires me about the original and kind of explode it. And take, what are the limits? What can take this farther? I'd seen plenty of Ouija. They created the Ouija boards called a subgenre in horror that Blumhouse then went on and made some amazing Ouija movies. But I'd seen that, and I knew that the pendulum boards were the predecessors. In the 1700s, it's a historical fact, the Pope outlawed pendulum boards, and people were burned at the stake if they were found to have them. So this was a tragic period in history. So there's a direct lineage, and the pendulum boards were also used for spell casting and divination, and offer me a real different world to cross into, and wonderful to shoot on film. So just knowing about that and intending to use a pendulum board at some point on film, I just thought, what if we take Witchboard to the roots and beyond the Ouija board and give the audiences something amazing and fresh?
Absolutely. And looking at Witchboard, came out in 1986. We had a couple sequels, and for the majority, I feel Witchboard, that property flies a little bit under the radar. I mean, it's talked about in the horror community, but it's not as prominent as a Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, all the ones in the 80s that were so heavy. So when you looked at that, was Witchboard the original something you had watched and were like, that's rather interesting. If I had a crack at this, this could be a passion project of mine, or was it just stars aligned, opportunity presented itself, and you're like, I'd love to
I
dive
was
into
aware. I was aware because I'm a horror fan too, and a lot of horror fans are aware of cult movies, which the original Witchboard certainly is. It sticks in your head, right?
Yep.
And oddly, some of this is not intellectual. I love that the title is so weird. I love it. Witchboard.
Yep.
I realized I could go deeper into Wicca and the mythology of witches. Using a cat this way in a horror film, the witch is familiar. I can't imagine why it hasn't been done. They're only done, kind of comedically.
Yep.
Although Pet Cemetery, I'd have to correct myself. Just being able to use these elements of the real historical Wicca and kind of let my imagination go wild, for me, it's an amazing sandbox to play in. So I kind of jumped on the opportunity when it came up about 5 years ago.
That's wonderful. And so we do the podcast. Our hearts, our true love lies with filmmaking, and we take a little bit of a break and we do a short film, and then we get back on it and we do another short film. And when we're writing something, sometimes you're writing a scene, it's just throwaway scene, and be like, that'll take a couple hours, maybe max, and then when you get on set, you're like, well,
It's
it's a
gonna take a
little
couple
more
of
depth.
days, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Not a couple of
It's like,
hours.
well, we've lost a whole weekend. Looking at Witchboard, and there are a lot of expansive scenes in that film. Was there anything? I know we're not going to dive into spoilers, so you can be as vague as you need to be. Was there anything in there where you're like, this is a little bit more of an obstacle than I thought it was when we actually got down to it?
What's weird is some of the most intense effects are practical. Most of the effects are practical. I only use CGI for what I call finishing. If I want to tweak something. On this film, I love CGI. We helped pioneer it on The Mask back in the day. But horror films are scarier with practical effects. And it's interesting that I'm still asked for interviews about Elm Street 3 and The Blob. The fans have made those evergreen, I think, because the practical effects hold up so well. So I've leaned that way here again. And to answer your question, some of the nightmare stuff with Madison Eisman went very complex sets. I had to build the whole bedroom and bathroom are 8 feet in the air. We're like accidentally walking off the set, which was just as dangerous as the stunt work itself. But because they're practical, I'll just put it like this: her first intense nightmare went surprisingly well, and there are many things that happened to her physically in that nightmare. But because it was practical and I'd rehearsed it with stunt people, that actually went surprisingly smoothly. The other sequence in the bathroom, not so much, because it involved water. It involved a dangerous drop into water, which is really her dropping into a medieval dream. And that was a big deal. But the thing is, I storyboard things. I've learned stunt craft, and there's a little bit of David Copperfield in all of us that like practical effects. We want to have the fun of creating that illusion. So I got to rehearse them. They went pretty well. I weirdly, I have no complaints. Even the cat, who people warned me, you can't direct cats. And I thought, well, that's another interesting challenge. I'll let you know how it goes. And CGI folks says we can't CGI cats believably yet. Believe it or not, it's easier to do a dinosaur, apparently. Fortunately, we had Titania and her trainers. Great cat, worked for Food and Love, just exactly what you want on a film set.
That's wonderful. I tell you, I'm a cat lover, so as soon as I saw the cat pop up, I was like, you know what? I'm sold. Absolutely. So
It's a cat you love to hate.
yes, exactly.
I just wanted to take the tradition of Witches Familiars and see if I could really make it horrific.
And it's like, I want to cuddle the thing. It may scratch out my eyes or put a spell on me, but
Exactly.
all is well. Uh, and then when you're writing a project, or you get an idea for a project, and you're starting to expand upon it, how does your writing process go? Is that something where you have to be alone, you have to sit down by yourself and just be
It
completely
depends,
involved?
because the screenplay takes some time. I believe I'm quick, but it still does. It's a range of things. Darabont and I did our rewrite, which was a pretty deep rewrite on Elm Street 3. We had only 11 days, and it was a complete rewrite. And I got us a cabin up at Big Bear, and we were trapped. I happened to come down with a fever, so Frank was giving me Hungarian soup to cure me. It was quite a bonding experience for me and Frank. That was intense, short period of time, and it was really two guys writing all day. Other experience where I'm writing solo. It's all about music. It's all about the initial idea being atom, and the structure of the story being a molecule, until I like that. And within that structure, every day, I try to surprise myself. I just never want to bore the audience.
Absolutely. And looking at starting with Elm Street, we have the Blob. So you kind of, you have this iconic slasher dealing in the dream world. You have this kind of cosmic horror from outer space.
The Blob is great because it's so primal.
Yes,
You cannot negotiate with the Blob.
absolutely. And again, that film, I just have an absolute love for, because everything's, on the table. There's no character that's safe. When we run into the sheriff and the waitress and their little kind of their relationship that they're having, and I'm like, oh, maybe these characters are safe. And then by the time we get to
No.
the one scene,
They are
it's like
not.
it is gut wrenching. So that's one of the things that I
Thank you.
absolutely love, is that nothing is off the table. It's like there's a
I think
risk
it's
in
important for
everything.
the audiences to know that there's a madman at the wheel. So they
Yes.
never quite relax too much that their characters will necessarily survive. Everyone kept asking me who's going to play Steve McQueen on the Blob. And so I said, what if I kill the person who's playing Steve McQueen in the first 20 minutes and set this whole thing on its head? And that was very effective.
Absolutely. That is a talking point
Big
between
spoiler,
me.
but if you haven't seen the movie by now, it's too late.
And if you haven't seen the movie, by now, what are you doing with your life? But and that's a talking point between me and my co-host all the time, is that choice is absolutely perfect,
Look,
because
give it up for Hitchcock and Psycho. At the time, Janet Leigh was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. And again, the shower scene is, people keep looking at the shots. They are good shots. But what really happened was he killed the star of the day way ahead of time for maybe the first time in cinema. And I saw that at some kind of weird black and white rerun as a child, and I never got over it. That was the one that traumatized me.
And really the last question that I have for you is, you've dove into so many different subgenres. You never just stuck with a slasher or cosmic horror. Now we're kind of, you mentioned the Ouija subgenre, so to speak. What could we see if Chuck Russell has his next choice in anything in terms of horror subgenres? What interests you the most in terms of horror storytelling?
It's we all get great teachers at different times in our life. Maybe get one or two if you're lucky over your whole school career. And one of my writing teachers said, don't tell your stories ahead of time. Wait until you've written it, not just for business reasons, but you got to keep it inside you. So I have a couple of notions and one specific story I'm working on right now, but I'm getting tunnel vision right through the release of these films, especially when I produce as well. And right now I'm launching Witchboard. But I had so much fun, I definitely would do another horror.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to it. If I see Chuck Russell attached to any horror, I'm gonna be absolutely
Thank
excited.
you.
I'm just waiting to see it. Really, that's all I have. I'm just thankful I got to see Witchboard. I'm excited for a bigger audience to see it, and I'll just, sir, your work is phenomenal.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
It's something I own a VHS of the Blob, although I have it on every other format as well, but that is one that I pop into my VCR regularly, and it gives me all the warm and fuzzies from
You know,
childhood. So,
quick note, you know the high school story at the beginning of the Blob where he goes to the pharmacist?
yes, yep.
Then he goes home to pick the girl up and it's the pharmacist he got his Trojans from. That was like a true story from my high school. So
No way.
I'd love to say I invented it, but it actually happened to a friend of mine.
And I'll tell you, anytime I show this film to anyone, that scene always gets a laugh because it's just the
It became a
turnaround of it.
legendary event at that high school.
It's perfect storytelling as much as Dream Warriors, Blob, Witchboard. Great storytelling, and I'm just excited to see what you do next.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being a filmmaker and great at this interview.
Do the horror shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.